It's been over 20 years since I saw the very first study potentially linking caffeine to a negative interaction with creatine, but I've never talked about it before. So in this video, I'm going to show you the actual clinical studies and the results of those clinical studies so you can get a better idea of whether caffeine really does interfere with the beneficial effects of creatine. And let's begin by going all the way back to 1996 and looking at this study that began the controversy. Caffeine counteracts the ergogenic action of muscle creatine loading. This study involves 9 healthy guys. They're in their 20s and they're given 0.5 grams per kilogram of creatine monohydrate daily for 8 days. 3 weeks later, they give them a placebo for the same duration, and 3 weeks later after that, they take creatine again, but now they take it with caffeine at a dose of 5 milligrams per kilogram. They also have these guys perform single leg extensions to measure muscle strength and muscle endurance. Results, no surprise. Creatine improves leg strength when doing leg extensions. However, this exercise enhancing effect disappeared when creatine was combined with caffeine. This led the researchers to conclude that caffeine interferes and counteracted the effects of creatine during intermittent exercise. A few years later, this paper was published. This study involves 10 physical education students who are put through 5 different protocols, each lasting 8 days. There's a creatine-only group where they took 5 grams of creatine for 4 days. There's a caffeine session group where they took 5 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight for 3 days. They also combined creatine and caffeine with the same dosage. And then there's also a single dose of caffeine where they take that 1 hour before exercise. And some may see this as a drawback, but they didn't measure strength with free weights or machines. Rather, they attached electrodes to the leg muscles and had them contract repeatedly. Basically, they wanted to see how well the quad muscles contract and relaxed under repeated muscle stimulation. Results, no surprise, creatine helped the muscles produce more force during repeated muscle contractions. Creatine also helped the muscles relax faster in between contractions too. Taking creatine by itself didn't have any of these benefits, but when creatine and caffeine were taken at the same time, caffeine again seemed to cancel out the beneficial effects of creatine monohydrate. In other words, the improvement in muscle relaxation time seen with creatine alone was abolished when caffeine and creatine were taken together. And this was seen also when caffeine was only taken 1 time an hour before exercise. In the words of the authors themselves, caffeine counteracted the beneficial effects of creatine intake on reaction time, causing enhanced fatigue of the muscles. Now, we're not done yet. A few years after that, there is this review article published of creatine and caffeine benefits where the author states that there is no rationale for their simultaneous use in sports, and it's further stated that using both of these compounds together may lead to negated exercise-enhancing effects. And I want to point out that to support that statement, the author is actually referencing the original 1996 paper. Now let's take a look at this paper. The effect of caffeine ingestion after creatine supplementation on intermittent high-intensity sprint performance. This study involves 12 physically active young men. Basically, these researchers wanted to see if caffeine would boost exercise performance after 5 days of creatine loading. And they also wanted to take a look at whether caffeine really did interfere with creatine's exercise benefits. So there's 3 basic parts of this study, and they're all separated by a month. There's a creatine loading phase where people took about 21 grams of creatine monohydrate daily for 5 days. On the 6th day, they're given either a single dose of caffeine or a placebo. And an hour after each of these treatments, the guys do sprints on a stationary bicycle. So did caffeine have any negative effects? Nope. In fact, in the paper, they even say that the caffeine-creatine combination actually boosted performance. If we jump ahead to 2015, we find this paper where the authors basically find that while neither caffeine or creatine appear to inhibit the absorption of each other, they do suggest that until more is known, it may be prudent to avoid high doses of caffeine when taking creatine monohydrate. However, a year later, this same lead author publishes this paper involving 54 resistance-trained men, and the study lasts for 6 days. The guys are split into these groups where creatine is not only combined with caffeine, but also with coffee too. And they tested muscle strength and endurance with bench press, leg press, and had them perform sprints on a stationary bike. Results showed that everyone, including the placebo takers, got stronger, and there was no differences in strength or sprint performance between the creatine-only group and the creatine plus caffeine groups, or those who took creatine with coffee. So in other words, caffeine did not negatively impact creatine creatine supplementation. And that brings us to this paper, which is a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, which was 6 weeks long and involved 28 men and women. And something else to point out here is that they were not doing the creatine loading phase. Rather, most people were getting about 7 grams of creatine daily and about 200 milligrams a day of caffeine. Results showed that caffeine did not reduce the effects of creatine monohydrate, but the combination also did not improve performance either. And also, other than promoting a little hypertrophy in the quadriceps muscle, it was also pointed out that creatine didn't improve strength or muscle endurance or anything else measured better than a placebo. And that may have occurred because the study probably didn't last long enough for creatine's effects to take hold. Okay, let's bring this home. Here are all of the studies I mentioned, with several others I didn't cover. As you can see, we have 2 papers which appear to show that caffeine interferes with creatine benefits. One review article also mentions this possibility, but it's basing its results on previously conducted studies that I mentioned earlier in this video. We also have 3 clinical trials which appear to show the opposite, that caffeine does not interfere with creatine monohydrate. Notice also that all of these studies have problems, ranging from only testing men to taking creatine only on exercising days, and overall just not lasting a long time. Based on these studies, I don't think there's enough research yet to definitively say that caffeine interacts negatively with creatine or not, because across the board, I think all of these studies are flawed. Something else, some of this research is also using the loading phase of creatine monohydrate when they combine it with caffeine. These days, most people don't do a loading phase. That said, if you are doing the loading phase and you're concerned with this, consider separating caffeine and creatine apart from each other for between 3 and 6 hours until we know more. And one more thing, caffeine and creatine may occur in supplements alongside multiple other ingredients. If you are taking a multi-ingredient supplement that contains creatine, caffeine, and other things, and it's not working for you, consider putting it aside for several weeks and just taking creatine by itself and see if that corrects the problem.